Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this ASCILITE Live webinar where we're going to listen to our advisors, members of the ASCILITE TELedvisors SIG are with us today, including Colin Simpson, who will be the moderator for this session and who is ASCILITE's 2019 Community Fellow winner based on his work with the TELedvisors. So I'm going to turn it over to Colin and take it away, guys.
Thank you very much, David. Hello, everyone. So we've got a fair amount to cover today. We're going to have 8 presenters talking about different aspects of the TELedvisors community, what we do, what we're all about. So I might ask that, obviously, please feel free to chat and ask questions in the chat, but we will probably save that for the end of the session. So just by way of introduction, I've been doing this kind of work for I think about 17 years. So I started out, did a Bachelor of Education, had a focus on media studies, moved into video production because that was my real sort of passion. Spilled over into training, community television. Decided I needed a career change because breaking into video was a challenge. So had a look at IT and then basically found a job that encapsulated all of this when I started working at the Canberra Institute of Technology, which is a TAFE college, in largely an education technology role, but I also taught video subjects, Cert 4 in training and assessment and the diploma of vet. Went on to do a Masters in Education, and then sort of shifted over to higher education sector, worked at ANU, Swinburne, and now Monash, where I am today. And in 2016, I also started a PhD study into these people that we call advisors. So I guess the first logical question is, what does TELedvisor actually mean? And there's a little bit to this. It's really about trying to find an umbrella term for a group of people who are doing a particular kind of work. So this is learning technologists, academic developers, learning designers, everyone who's sort of in this space where we are basically supporting learning and teaching, but not necessarily actually doing it ourselves. So advisor, Kate actually coined as we were scrabbling around to find a word, and it's a portmanteau of educator and advisor, because we're advising educators, but we are also educators in our own right in many times. So yeah, it really does cover these 3 kind of core roles. And at some point we needed to say, okay, look, this is what it is and this is what it isn't. So obviously there's people providing academic support to students, and support in research to academics and whatever else. But largely what we do is this support and advice and partnership with people in teaching places. And it's not just higher education, it's also the vet sector, it's also schools, it's also corporate training. It's very important that we identify and occupy this space. Currently we have 485 members from more than 74 institutions around Australia. And we actually have members spread across the world. So obviously the majority of people are in Australia and New Zealand. We've got Singapore, we've got Qatar, we've got the United Arab Emirates, people in Syria, Ireland, the UK, and the US as well. So we are growing to be an international community, which is largely people who have just kind of found us. That's just really nice. So we actually started at the ASCILITE conference in 2016 in Adelaide and launched with around 20 members. And these are some of the members who were with us right from the very beginning. You may recognise a few faces in there. We're all very serious. It came from a recognition, I'd sort of been talking to colleagues, and you have the conversations with people working in these kind of roles. And we basically just identified that there was a real need for support. And we faced a number of particular challenges in the kind of work that we were doing. There's a gap in understanding of the roles and the skills and the knowledge that we bring to our work. There's a gap in the understanding of the value that we actually contribute to the workplace and what we actually stand for as well. We wanted to see more collaboration between us as a sector, and we wanted to look at what we can do to establish a little bit more credibility as a profession and a discipline. And as we go on, my colleagues in the group will sort of expand on these things. Which brings us to Kate. Over to you, Kate.
Thanks, Colin. I'll talk a little bit about my role, like my background in relation to, I guess, how I might compare to other TELedvisors. I've been a learning designer specific roles for over the last 5 years or so, and other similar roles before that, but not coined learning designer. I've been working in training and education in some form for nearly 20 years. Similar to Colin, I'm an ex-TAFE teacher, ex-media background. That tends to be pretty similar for a lot of other TELedvisors, although we are a pretty diverse cohort. Christine Slade and her colleagues did a number of, a big survey with people as learning designers, and found that they came from pretty diverse backgrounds, but a lot were in media design, media production, or education, and that seems to be backed up in my experience. Education's kind of the top one, and then some others in kind of IT, business and communications, professional writing and editing, that sort of thing, and library and uni administration as well. I have a Master of Education, which ties into my work, because I think most of us are pretty passionate about the work we do, and it tends to just absorb our personal lives as well. I'm hoping to do a PhD in the future. I guess partly because I would like to be able to move up into more leadership roles. And I fell into higher ed tech through kind of needing a break from secondary teaching, and then finding a higher ed role, falling into it, realizing that it was like Colin, a good encapsulation of kind of all of my skills. So, and it wouldn't surprise me if other people kind of did the same. In terms of some of the key challenges, and just, I guess, explaining a little bit about who TELedvisors are, following on from Colin, we're pretty broad in our membership and who we attract and encourage to become part of the SIG, but I guess primarily we are encouraging people like academic developers, learning designers, and educational technologists. But those kind of roles, there's a lot of blurring in there. Colin Chia and I did a presentation at ASCILITE in 2017, talking a bit about the issues around the wording of those roles, the way the position descriptions are described in different institutions, the lack of clarity in duties, the overlap. So when we talk about these roles in the SIG, we are obviously assuming that people either incorporate and intersect between technology and pedagogy in their role, or that they have a really keen interest in it, which from I guess a traditional standpoint, academic developers, that's kind of not, it's becoming more a part of the role now because everything's technology, and people obviously have an interest, but traditionally academic developers have been more, I guess, curriculum design rather than technology related pedagogies. But again, that space is changing. Learning designers tend to do a lot of what academic developers do, and so there's a real kind of blurring in that sense as well. And then Colin and Chia and I talked a bit about the technologist role, and how there's a little bit of contention there because some see it as a strategic role and others see it more as an implementation role. So it's a really kind of muddy, they're quite muddy waters to be in. This can lead to some real challenges in practice. Partly there's a bit of research around the idea that people in our roles have high agency but low authority, and that our authority comes from building strong relationships with academic staff, because a lot of what our roles entail is around capacity building, training and support, as well as then curriculum or technology-based design and development. Design and development is a bit of a blurry term as well, because it tends to get used a bit interchangeably across different institutions. Sometimes it's referred to in terms of building curriculum, sometimes it's referred to in building digital experiences, sometimes it's about building training materials. So it's a bit of a catch-all, and it's not really clear. And there's also a real lack of clarity around naming across institutions. I think in our research from a couple of years back, it was like 25 different kind of names across 37 position descriptions. I can't remember quite the number, but it was a good chunk of them had unique names. So it's really hard to get a sense of consistency across the sector. What this might mean, or what the research is suggesting and what anecdotally we're seeing, is that it can lead to a bit of a misrepresentation of what we do inside institutions, like a clarity and a mismatch between what we see our role is and what other people see our role as within institutions. It can lead to limited authority for making change, and also sometimes tensions around I guess what we would define as kind of good technology implementation and technology use in learning and teaching, and how we would define and implement that versus how an institution might, especially when a lot of us are contract roles brought in to implement a particular strategic plan, and you get a little bit of mismatch around that because we're kind of maybe brought in to implement something that somebody's already decided on, rather than us getting to have input into what that should look like. And then on top of that, I guess the fact that we all kind of do some similar things can lead to some tensions just around, well, who should do what, who can do what, are you stepping on other people's toes? And then briefly just around Slade and her friends found that there was also a real challenge around professional development and career progression for learning designers. And I think in that sense, it could be partly from that misunderstanding of the role, partly diverse, people have diverse career goals. Some of that is around leadership and research, but some of it is actually just wanting to progress into more senior levels of their existing role, not change career paths. And then some of it is also tied to the fact that a lot of us are on contracts. And so when you're on a short-term contract position, it's really hard to get, funding for things, professional development. You're changing institutions pretty regularly. So they're all things to kind of think about. And my kids screaming in the background, sorry. Just briefly, a couple of things that we've done and that other people have done. I've put these up, there's heaps more, but I've mentioned these because they're all publicly available, so you can go and have a look at them in your own time. We'll pass those slides on, and that they kind of talk a lot about our roles. I'll pass it on to Kahiwa.
Thanks, Kate. So a little bit different to Colin and Kate. I don't have a degree in education. I don't have experience in media, but I came to the advisory world from more of a technology side. So yeah, my name is Kahiwa Sabaya. I'm based in Adelaide, and I just want to acknowledge that I'm meeting today on the land of the Kaurna people, the traditional custodians of the Adelaide Plains. So I've spent the last kind of 10 odd years across a really wide variety of all things that intersect education and technology. So I've worked in a university, I've worked in state government, compulsory kind of K-12 education, and now doing work in vocational education and training. I've been a designer of the things, a developer of resources, a facilitator, and a leader of teams and also projects. I've looked at in-person, blended, and online. And I've also worked in client side and vendor side for a couple of different technology companies. My area of, I suppose, qualification and expertise has really evolved into evaluation. So I've recently completed a Master of Evaluation, and in that looked really closely at how do we understand what good looks like in terms of learning and capability development, what evaluation might offer to how we understand and make judgment and decisions from learning analytics, and also how we think about value for investment in terms of the technology that we select and implement. And I just want to build on what Kate had talked about in terms of the research in this space. One of the goals that we have as an organisation, and I was lucky enough to be a part of the management committee for TELedvisors for a couple of years. There are probably two kind of areas that we're really thinking about. So one is about how we expand our understanding of advisors generally in those different types of roles that Colin and Kate spoke about. And I think for those who are looking at research in that area, there's a really strong opportunity to invite and expand our thinking about these types of roles, to encapsulate all of those different position titles and roles and responsibilities and the implications of that variety in the research that we're doing. So we know that there are journals around academic development, for example. To some extent, they also include things like the learning technologists and the educational designer roles. But what are the opportunities for people in organisations in these roles or in doing this research to be working alongside advisors across institutions and across roles to be documenting some of the challenges and opportunities that Kate talked about. The other goal, and I think that we also have, is thinking about evidence-informed practice. So I think one of the commonalities between advisors, regardless of role, and also the educators that we're often working with, is that idea that we want to be working with evidence-informed practice. And one of the really strong opportunities that advisors present is because they're often in a role that might be supporting a whole institution or supporting multiple disciplines, they're often people who see trends and literature across disciplines and across different contexts. And there's an opportunity there to say, how might we be able to leverage those experiences and that knowledge and that practical expertise when we're thinking about what good or better learning or technology looks like across those disciplines. We have had a number of different projects where people have worked with TELedvisors. So if you are someone who is doing research or looking to do research, the invitation is there and open to come and talk to us about the broader network, how we might be able to help. And a couple of quotes there. So in particular, just wanting to highlight from Ingrid, being able to leverage that diversity of the TELedvisors network can be a significant advantage. And also being able to make broader connections of people who might be doing little bits and pieces of your role and expanding that expertise and understanding there. So thank you, everyone. I am going to pass on to Chia.
Thank you, Kahiwa. This is Chia here. I'm hoping that everyone can hear me. Can somebody say yes?
Yes, Chia.
Sound great.
Thank you, Wendy. It's really good to be here. I can't believe it was back in 2016 that Colin, Kate, and I talked about forming this group. And since then, I have been able to come to and mingle with this group. And I recognize some of your names and people here in the chat room. And it's good to be here. But I have been following and admiring all the great work that this group has been doing. So it's really nice to be here today. Thank you for having me. So a bit about me. In my day job, I wear the part of the Director Digital Learning at Deakin University, and what that means is that I lead teams and all things around digital learning innovation at the university. And so I sit within the Central Learning and Teaching unit called Deakin Learning Futures. And so I work across the university with faculties and other divisional teams in and around digital learning and education, which is a really privilege, and it's really relevant to the kind of work that you're all doing as well. And in my spare time, like anyone else, I teach and research as well. One of the teaching that I'm still doing, but I really heavily rely on my team to facilitate day-to-day operation of this, is the Mooc. Some of you might have heard of this, Transforming Digital Learning, Learning Design Meets Service Design. So it looks at all kinds of digital learning design issues. And it was promoted through the Austrade and TEXA this year through the COVID-19 as well, that people were looking for a network of people and community to learn more about digital learning and becoming an online educator or digital learning professional. So it's really about that. It's a short 2-week course, which is part of the introductory unit that I designed and developed with my team back in 2018. And this forms a foundation unit into the postgraduate degrees of the grad cert and master of digital learning leadership. And so I research in and around these areas of work, and these are some of the research interests that I have. But since my colleagues here have been talking about their backgrounds a bit, I hold education background in Masters of Education and Bachelor of Education. And back in Japan, I wanted to be an English teacher to begin with, but then I developed further my passion for education, but also languages. So I decided to do a PhD at the University of Edinburgh in linguistics. So I'm also a social linguist. So I've been teaching in that area of linguistics for some time. And then I had an opportunity to, I suppose, make a shift into learning and teaching, rekindling my passion for education through that course of work. And Hank, that I worked with at the Bachelor Institute back in Darwin, I know some of my work then as well, my good colleague from that time. So that is just about me. And one of the challenges that I've been asked by my good colleague Colin to talk about today is this idea of third space. Kahiwa and Kate already touched on this, but this idea of the divide that exists between professional and an academic staff in digital learning initiatives, and it's a really contested space. So I thought to just touch quickly on one of the classic literature that defined this idea of third space, I suppose, for educational initiatives, Whitchurch 2008 paper. And since then, time has passed, but it's always nice to go back to the classic study and actually think that this is still relevant and has got currency. So they looked at the divide that exists between academic and professional staff. That's basically the third space. And within those professional positions, they found different types or breeds, if you like, from bounded to unbounded professionals who understood those boundaries but used or didn't use those boundaries to their advantage. And having a framework like this actually gives us a language, I think. And then there are lots of studies, including Colin's PhD and some others recently, looking at those kind of frameworks to set the scene and understand what's going on in this third place, gives us a language to talk about what we do, and we find ourselves in those kind of frameworks as well. So this is me in that green highlights there, that I sit within that academic manager's position now. So I am in an academic position, which kind of comes with this idea of research and teaching. And I still supervise PhD students as well. But also it's got that professional managerial sort of responsibility. So in my team, I manage both academic and professional staff. in working on the digital learning innovation projects. And it's both an opportunity to be really learning with and from those of my team members that bring such diverse expertise. But it can also be a challenge in some areas when people don't really clearly see those boundaries and how those boundaries actually cross over with each other. But as many mentioned here, in the area of TEL or digital learning initiatives, it's really impossible to work alone and solo. It really has to come with that idea of multifunctional teams. So I'm really privileged to be part of that sort of environment where I get to work in different areas, wear different hats, like many of you always do. So this is the sort of a hashtag shameless plug moment, but I talked about the Mooc that I've done with my team, and it is running currently for the 7th time. And like it said, it's been promoted by different organizations, and we've had over the course of 7 runs that we've done, 22,000 global learners. And I say learners, but they're mostly professionals who are working in multiple of roles that my colleagues here today talked about. So it's really a professional development space, but also creating this safe environment where people can really share their practice and struggles on top of learning about design issues in digital learning. And it's part of our postgraduate degrees at Deakin. And in week 2, it's a 2-week course, but in week 2, I talk a lot about this idea of boundary crossing and what multifunctional team can bring in education for digital learning. And I challenge the notion of educators sort of from the sage on the stage, traditional academics role, being in the lecture room, to more around curators, which is a George Siemens' work on educators as curators. And then you see the video of a teacher, academic there talking and unpacking what that means for him, and some of the other academics share their insights as well. And then talk also about the networked practice, which is all about your stories as digital learning practitioners, learning designers, academic developers, multimedia producers, project managers who needed to come together to create this Mooc with me together. And it's a real lived stories of those who come with different expertise. And so these kind of content in learning about the practice, but also design issues, create this space where people can bring their expertise and insights to unpack what this means for others as well. So thank you for giving attention to listen to me. And with that, I'd like to pass over to Penny. Thanks, Penny.
Thank you. Thank you. Welcome. Hello, everybody. Lovely to see you. Just on that idea that we've come from very diverse backgrounds, my day job is as an academic developer in the Central Learning and Teaching Unit. But looking back at my history, this is just an extract of the kind of roles that I've done over time. So I'm an English literature graduate. I did instructional technology at Deakin in the very olden days. I did an e-learning master's at UTS, which was very focused on social learning. That was that main contribution at the time. I'm a linguistics researcher, and I'm a senior fellow of HEA. So I guess I embody in some ways the TELedvisor role because I've been all kinds of educator. I've been in the TAFE, I've been at school even. I've been an education officer in government and in an art gallery. So I've stepped through all those roles, and that means that in my academic developer role now, I am very much crossing boundaries across my team because a quarter of our formal certification in tertiary training, our GCHE, for our staff is a technology unit, which I lead. So I hope that I've done enough boundary crossings myself to be a representative member of this group, but picking up on Chair's boundaries in order to work in places, and particularly when we can't meet face to face and have that tremendous connection across the teams, but to advocate for beautiful practice, engaging the learners, effective development, evidence-based pedagogy, we need some other space. We need to make an alternative space, a sort of light virtual framework. And both our Twitter tag and our blog are two spaces where we can make those points of connection. The actual person who is TELedvisors on Twitter has made 1,100 tweets to date, but even more productive, the hashtag brings together Twitter discussions right across the sector. Our blog invites authors to focus in hard on a particular aspect of their work, and again, our authors are drawn from across that TELedvisor community and beyond. And you'll see in that blog, which I hope you all will subscribe to, accounts of practice that show the complexity and range of what TELedvisors do. We're still growing the readership of the blog, but its archive is building, and it's boosted by guest posts from other blogs and by TELedvisor webinars and meetups. So that's a great resource for permanent presence to show that alternative working space. So that role of bringing different sectors together, which you can see under the hashtag of the TELedvisors, where there's sort of double tagging of the conference that you're in and your TELedvisor network as well. That's again providing a sort of a trace of that boundary spanning role. The disparate membership of TELedvisors means we are a network of networks, and we're reaching into the policy work and advocacy of other umbrella organisations, such as what was ACO, the Council of Australasian University Leaders in Learning and Teaching. As my colleague said, working in research groups to develop and reflect on how professional development happens now. And TELedvisors are also having a wide impact through those points of connection. Most remarkable, of course, in the pandemic-driven rapid shift to online, and where we were making rapid interconnections with other groups in similar roles. And of course, we make sure that everyone at the ASCILITE conference knows we are a thing. And I would suggest that we're trying for TELedvisors are trying for a TEL workshop, a totally engaged learning workshop. And that's snapped there from a Singapore workshop, which was highly engaged experience. And let me pass on now to Jenny.
Thanks, Penny. My name's Jenny James. I'm a learning teaching consultant within Griffith Sciences at Griffith University. I've been in higher education for approximately 18 years. I commenced a position at QUT as a graphic designer in 2002. And in 2010, I accepted a role at Griffith as a web multimedia developer, as a graphic designer, multimedia designer. Since then, in 2013, I completed a graduate certificate in higher education, and that year I accepted a position as an educational designer in the central unit. And since then, I've worked as a blended learning advisor and also an educational designer, both in the central unit and in the schools, and have also achieved Senior Fellow of the Higher Education Academy. I'm also currently studying a graduate certificate in university learning and teaching, It's a revised version of the grad cert in higher education that I did in 2013. But because it's been a while, I thought I'd go back and do something again to keep up with the times. As I said, I've worked in the central unit and also in the schools. I think the differences between those and some of the challenges of working in those is between the different advisor types. So Colin and Kate spoke about the professional and academic roles within the TELedvisor group, and Chia also spoke about the divide which can be found between those. So in the central unit, we have a much larger group and it's better supported. So the image on the left-hand side shows part of the central unit here at Griffith. And the other two diagrams to the right of it show different structures within the schools. So in each of those, there's educational designers or learning and teaching consultants, which are pretty much the same role. As I said, in the past, I worked as a blended learning advisor in the business school, which was a few years ago. And it was decided back then that that role, which was sort of like an educational technologist role, crossed over those boundaries that we've spoken about already into the learning designer role. So they ended up merging those and made it a learning teaching consultant design role. And I think those roles have been blended even more in terms of the roles we're in now and the academic roles. So I think in terms of the challenges, it's how do we collaborate within each of those. So in terms of the learning and teaching consultants, we collaborate across the schools and in the central unit. So we meet together quite regularly. And we try to bring together some of the challenges that we face within the schools and some of the innovations that we've done, solutions, projects we've worked on, things like that, and how different they might be to the central unit, which pretty much has a different agenda as well. So that's probably one of the other challenges, is that the agenda of the central unit is more overarching, looking at university-wide projects, where in the schools we tend to focus more on just courses and program development. So the one way we bring together everyone across all groups is through a TELedvisor group. So we try to meet quite regularly as well. And we also meet with people within all the other divisions of the university to speak about technology as well. So I haven't worked in any of the other sectors before. I've mainly just worked in university, but I've heard that some of the challenges of working amongst those is moving amongst sectors. So the challenges between going from, say, a vet sector to a higher education sector, that they might find that there's a big difference between the collaboration between the academics and the professionals, and it's quite different to that in the vet sector, and also the focus on research. So it might be new, moving from the vet sector to higher education, or if somebody is moving the other way around from higher education to vet, that they might find that that research is more missing from that. Some of the other challenges are the accreditation requirements, and also the finding someone that you can talk to in a similar role in the same sector, as well as similar roles within the different sectors. And I think that's where our TELedvisor group brings together that and creates that community amongst all the different sectors and provides opportunities for people to meet up with somebody in similar roles as well for support. So now I'll pass over to Wendy. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny. Hi, everyone. My name's Wendy Tellio, and I'll start with this slide of who is a TELedvisor. I think the wiggly line here is really, it is a timeline because I'm just one person, but it's a moving sort of meshed career path. So I started with networking, the literal sort of plug in the wall support for hubs, etc., in a backbone sort of large networks in Melbourne. After my degree, moved into IT and training. I've had a sector of 5 or 6 years in the South Pacific, working for various sectors in IT for development. And I think the sort of the background through all of that was still training. There was always a component of training, and it moved into education when I come back to Australia, and was sort of now morphed into EdTech. And the top right there shows some of the official degrees, just because that's what other people have been sharing. But I would like to acknowledge that the CNE stands for Certified Novel Engineer. In IT, there was always vendor certificates to gain, and I did a lot of those. And I would say I'd also acknowledge the Moocs, particularly in 2015. The EDC Mooc and the Rhizomatic Learning Mooc was very influential on my thinking and helped me progress towards the Masters that I finished last year. And I can say there's 27 years between the first degree on that right-hand box and the last one. So quite a wiggly line. And the picture on the far right is the light coming out of the glass fibre, and you know, who knows what will be happening after that. But it's a continuing journey, that's for sure. So I'm approaching this slide for a number of reasons. First of all, the Shell Mace is in Melbourne, which is corner of 1 Spring Street for those people in Melbourne, or you may know of it. I spent an awful lot of time in the basement of this building doing patching. One of my roles was managing the team that supported the backbone of the network just as it was moving from copper to fibre. So a really interesting time from the history of this building, which was the Mace was put there in 1989. But I also like to refer this diagram back to what Chia was saying about bounded and unbounded, and we've talked about the points of connection and boundaries. And you'll notice with this Mace, the way the designer Charles O'Perry has designed it is that there's actually a space created in the middle. And so that's a reference to the third space that we've been talking about, that even though we're all connected and we all sort of join up, it's sort of, if you're familiar with the Mobius strip, we do move around and twist to create quite strong structures. And perhaps in this picture, TELedvisors is sitting in that mysterious space in the middle there. So I'd like to talk about building community, because I've been in the leaders group for a couple of years and was certainly part of the TELedvisors group from its inception. And Maha Bali and her writings, you can Google this for intentional, equitable hospitality, was certainly something that I've seen prolific in TELedvisors, and something that I intentionally brought with me. And I brought that with me from Maha Bali's work and Autumn Kane's work in virtually connecting, which some of you may or may not be aware of. So the intentionality that we have in TELedvisors comes across in so many different ways. For example, we think about how to make our community diverse in the presenters that we have for webinars. We think about equity a lot, and we discuss it amongst the leaders group, and our hospitality is intentional in just things like, before a webinar we would have a chat time before, and we have a chat time afterwards. We have a Teams channel for the leaders group, and that helps us stay connected, both synchronous and asynchronous ways. In the Moodle site, which is where the numbers come from for the membership, we've got discussion forums, but then we've got other areas that help build community. The research area, it's, you know, everybody's been quite busy in different areas this year, but there is 4 different strands of ways that we want to connect with each other in research. There's the advocacy, which Penny has talked about and Henk will talk about more. There's the blog. So all of these have been discussed and intentionally put in place to connect with the community. So I would see both my career and even the others that we've heard from already, it's more of a mesh situation happening there. Penny mentioned about Twitter. We also have LinkedIn and Zotero. We have Teach Support, which was set up that in, I think, March, maybe April. We set up open online spaces that anybody could connect with to discuss teaching online. And we've also had pop-up events like the Tea Walk, which is a combination of building community through the social platform, but also the physical. So it was a walk around campuses and sharing on Twitter pictures and answers to questions. So that was a really interesting space to join what happens on our campuses and share that through Twitter across, we had about 4 or 5 campuses participating. So I'm really, it's just been fantastic to work with the TELedvisors team, and I'll pass on to Henk. Thank you.
Thanks, Wendy. That's really good. I work in Meanjin, Brisbane, which is Yagara and Turrbal country. I'm just looking at the clock, and I'm just realizing that I don't really have an awful lot of time. But the good news about that is that most of what I was going to talk about, others have already talked about. So Kate and Chia talked about boundary crossing a lot. Kahiwa talked a little bit about research. And like Penny, if you look at, who's changing this? Okay. Like Penny, if you look at my backgrounds, it's pretty much shows the diversity of this group of people, which I think is one of its major strengths. But it also potentially makes us a little bit vulnerable at times. And I'm not just talking about employment-wise. Kate talked about contracts, but also within the institutions themselves. Particularly if you do research. I'm an academic within a third space. And there are issues around, and there's quite a bit of rigidity around academic disciplines, academic promotion, how that relates to teaching, how that relates to research, how that gets defined. And if you cross boundaries, you're hard to catch, so to speak, in these kind of systems that exist. So it makes it tricky, and so it means that it's good to have a group like this for advocacy reasons and as a community of practice. I was going to talk a little bit, we do quite a lot of webinars, as most of you will be aware of. So, and these, if you look at the topics of those webinars, they kind of cross, they kind of typify boundary crossing. Some of them are quite focused on universities, some of them are focused on the vet sector, schools, some of them have a tech focus, others are quite focused on academic interests, and it kind of evolves. We've also started to do meetups, like face-to-face meetups. And mostly that's for social reasons, but particularly in the Queensland ones, we've also started to add some professional development to those to kind of build a community of practice. Particularly the one that was at Griffith last year had a lot of people, so up to about 80 or 90. I'll leave it there because we're almost running out of time and Colin wants to round this off. So thanks everyone. Nice to see you all.
Great, thank you, Henk. Yeah, so one of the reasons that we had as many presenters as we did is to really emphasise the point that collectively Edvisors bring a really diverse amount of experience to the sector, to the work that we do. And I think that this is probably our greatest strength in some parts. In terms of what's next, we are very keen to keep growing the group and looking for new ways to actually support our members and activity. We do have a couple of events coming up. We've got a webinar this Thursday. I'd certainly like to see people there. Dr. Ivona Zaplinski will be talking about education design for networked learning. And we're also collaborating with Herza SIG of academic developers, looking at some of the lessons learned from COVID. And, you know, everyone's seen a lot of these lately, but this should be a good one. If you're interested, if you are working in this space, you're not involved, please come along and join us. Just pop along to TELedvisors.net and become part of the community. So with 3 minutes left on the clock, I'd love to hear your thoughts. There was a couple of questions in the chat, but yeah, I'd like to open it up now.
Yep, thanks, Colin. We did have a question in the chat from Keith Haggart. He was asking about not just the value of CMALT, but the value of HEA for folks in the ed designer, advisor type roles. I don't know if you can speak to that.
Look, I've done both of them, and look, I mean, a number of our members have done something, and it does speak a little bit, I guess, to our to our credibility. You know, having something that we can say, yes, we are a part of this, and we have, you know, demonstrated our value in this way is useful, and the reflection that you kind of go through as well, and, you know, evaluating other people's assessment or submissions has been really valuable. I don't know if it has an impact on applying for a job. I guess that's going to vary. I don't know if there's anyone here who can speak to that.
I can talk a little bit as a former manager of a team, and just kind of really briefly, what we went through there was there weren't very many people that had CMALT or HEA, but we actually did do that as part of a concerted professional development activity. So worked with the team to say, how can you work together to go through that application process? It didn't really work out as originally planned, but it was a really useful activity for the ones who did complete it in my team to reflect on their practice and the different kind of elements of research and evidence and things that they bring into it. And I think Kim, and I thought I saw Emma also at Adelaide, had done that recently as well.
Yes, good point, Kahiwa. And I see Jenny talk about the importance of self-reflection, and for me, it's about that too. I haven't done CMALT, but I know the colleagues who have done it, and I personally done the Senior Fellow at HEA last year. And it was just an opportunity to really reflect on what work you've done and involve others, because you have to have 2 referees at least for the HEA application. And through the lens of others, you get to really articulate what you've done, what you've learned, and where you're going. And And that process itself is a really great learning opportunity and for growth as well. So I found that to be a real opportunity.
Great. Thanks for that, guys. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
That's right. I was just going to add a little bit on top of that. So, yeah, I've done, as I said, the Senior Fellow HEA, and I've also been an assessor and a mentor. And I did recently apply for the CMALT accreditation process. So I was just going to say, if anyone was thinking about doing the CMALT, there is a lot of workshops and resources available now to support you in doing the submission. I think they are pretty low on assessors, but at the moment, because it's been about 8 months and I haven't heard back yet, but it is only because they're looking for assessors. So I think they're both worthwhile. Yeah.
Thanks for that, Jenny. I realize we are at time. I want to thank Colin and company for presenting today, and obviously in the chat are the links to the TELedvisors community so that we can continue the discussion there. I want to thank everyone for taking the time out of the day to join us. Please stay tuned to the ASCILITE website for our upcoming ASCILITE live webinars. Thanks.